Thank you today for joining us, and thank you, speakers, for taking the time out of your schedule to talk about what I would call GBS's new superpower. If you remember the tee-up slide, is it skills? Is it capabilities? No, it's mindsets. What we're going to walk you through this morning is the difference between average performance, hopefully not subpar performance, and performance that actually drives business outcomes for the enterprise. How do we define global business services performance? It's a measure of the organization's ability to consistently, and the key word is consistently, deliver whatever it chooses to deliver at quality, at cost, and make sure that they align with what the enterprise needs at any given time, able to transform the business at a pace that it can sustain, and last but not least, contribute to growth and competitiveness of the enterprises that we serve. So, good definition of performance. Now let's go a level deeper and talk about mindsets. If I could have the next slide, please. If you go to any conference these days or read most thought leadership on GBS, in an age of AI, we're still trying to crack the talent equation. We talk about individual skills, capabilities, competencies, and we mix them all up. For purposes of today, what we're talking about are skills. Skills are the ability to do work and bring GBS to life. But skills combined together into process mastery, digital mastery, data mastery, domain mastery actually drive critical outcomes. When they're aligned together, we can actually start moving the dial. But the cherry on top, the icing on the cake, if we can have the next slide, is mindsets. Again, GBS superpower. What are they? They're the DNA of the organization. They're a set of beliefs and attitudes that very critically the GBS organization shares. They color priorities, resourcing, the way the organization thinks, acts, and deems important. It's not a North Star, but it's the how a GBS delivers. So mindsets, again, are having the right team align on a set of beliefs and attitudes. So let's start to unpack that. If we can look at the next slide, please. What are these mindsets? Well, after a lot of research, actually talking to leaders in the industry and seeing what they thought, we came up with 11 mindsets, which range from all about the customer, making sure that we're delivering products and services that the enterprise and its component parts, the business and the functions, actually need, to service obsession. Are we delivering what we promised to deliver consistently, at quality, and delighting, the folks who consume them? To data-driven. Do we use data to communicate? Do we use data to make decisions? That's a mindset. Are we inclusive? And we're not talking about DEI here, but are we harnessing the power of different points of view? But here are the 11 mindsets that the GBS leadership community has decided are most important to drive GBS importance. So taking these mindsets, how do we assess whether a team is actually aligned? If we can go to the next slide, please. Let's talk about the assessment. It's an innovative and rather analytical approach to determine what is critical, what needs to be in place to drive and align teams' behaviors and attitudes towards performance. Next, please. The assessment pivots on 3 key elements. Ranked mindsets, which what the team and the leader think or list as important. Why do we say list? Because there's a lot of environmental noise. We are all creatures of our environment. And when we hear our leaders say end-to-end thinker, as a team, we're going to start to focus on end-to-end thinking. If the marketplace is talking about digital, 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 that's going to inform our list. So listing what we believe based on the environment is important is the first step. But are those really the mindsets that we're holding true in the way we operate? So we look at assess mindsets. What our participants actually believe is important. How strongly do they align with them in principle? And the third thing we look at is level sets. What are level sets? Level sets take the mindsets and say, how mature are we along that mindset dimension? How mature is our ability to use data? How mature is our focus on the customer? So the mindset is a 100-question questionnaire, only takes 40 minutes. What we are able to see is, what do we list as important? What do we really think is important? And last but not least, what's the gap between what we think is important and the operations on the ground? So if we can go to the next, what does it do? What does this actually do for a leader? Align the team. If we have team members who are going different directions, are not working off the same work plan, are not reading the same memo, we've got some performance challenges. We've got to understand what those gaps are in order to foster constructive dialogue and collaboration. We need clarity and focus on what's important. And last but not least, by assessing our mindsets, we can start to put together actionable plans that actually put them in place, put these behaviors and attitudes in place to drive performance. So how does it work? If we can go to the next slide, please. Let's talk about mindsets in action. Next. Here's a use case of how aligning mindsets actually work. Let's first look at the GBS head and leadership's mindsets in this example. Here's as I mentioned, this is an example. Looking at orange, and remember orange is the leader, blue is the team. What we asked a leader to do is list his mindsets. And then in aggregate, we compiled the team's list of mindsets. So Arushi, what is this telling us? We've got, again, on the left, the leader, and on the right, the team.
Right. No, thank you so much for this, Deborah. Basically, what we wanted to also do in this webinar is help you all understand exactly how this assessment takes place. And as Deborah mentioned, the orange is basically an aggregate of the GBS head that have taken our assessment so far, whereas the blue is basically their L1s or their -1s. So their entire GBS leadership team. How are they ranking their mindsets? What we're actually getting out of this particular assessment is, when we look at these results, is that while both the groups are valuing aspects such as value customer centricity or data or digital, the order of priorities are sort of varying across the two groups, which sort of shows us a role-based focus between the heads as well as the leadership team. In the orange box, we can see that the GBS heads are placing more attention and more importance to mindsets such as all about the customer or service success, which sort of reflects more inclination towards external stakeholder orientation or accountability for a service excellence. Leadership team, on the other hand, is putting a more focus on end-to-end thinking or agility, which sort of signals of more focus on execution or adaptability or process integration. What is the key takeaway here from this is basically that, and what we've also seen across different assessments so far is that the leadership the GBS head would tends to have a more customer oriented or service excellence sort of a mindset. However, in a lot of the cases, we are seeing that the leadership team is more execution oriented. So thinking more about the end-to-end thinking, data, digital innovation is what we are seeing. So yeah.
Yeah, I think when you look at these rankings, again, this is what's listed and important. One of the things we're finding also is that the leader, the head, is sending out messages. If he or she is a very strong proponent of end-to-end and moving the model to end-to-end, it's logical that the team is going to list as a very top-ranked mindset end-to-end thinker. So environment plays a pretty big role in the listing of mindsets. But is this really the way our leaders and their teams think? Let's go to the next slide. If we can go to the next. One of the things that we're able to do by just asking a scant 100 questions is get in the minds of a leader and heads and teams to see what they really think. And by looking at the slide, the dark fingers are the top ranked mindsets of the team. We wanted to see how much the rankings and the actual assessment align. Again, the orange is the leader or the head, and the blue is the team. So Arushi, what are we seeing here when we look at, we put assessments on top of each other?
Right. Yeah. So one of the few key takeaways from this particular chart is basically, as we already also saw in the previous slide, the GBS heads, they are still peaking at all about the customer. And you can see that by way of the orange dot being farther away from the blue dot. What is the ideal scenario is where the oranges and the blues are actually overlapping, specifically for the top 5 ranked mindsets by your GBS head, which are the dark gray line items. So yeah, clearly we are seeing that the all about the customer is it has a lot of higher importance is being placed by the GBS head, whereas in some of the other mindsets, for example, the commercially savvy mindset or the digital first mindset, we are seeing that the leadership team is actually scoring a little higher than their GBS heads, which sort of shows probably like a miscommunication or just a difference in their beliefs and attitudes as to what will exactly drive a higher GBS performance for their organization. So overall, we can see that the charts are somewhat overlapping. So there is a bit of an agreement on the fundamentals. However, some of the critical mindsets, we do see there is certain gaps that needs certain attention to.
Right. As Arushi said, this is actually a fairly cheerful chart because this team, in this instance, this team is pretty much aligned, but they think about the customer differently. And very surprisingly, the team believes that digital first behaviors take on more importance than the leader does. So let's look at another component of the analysis. Let's look at the level sets. Again, level sets are what the team and leader perceive as the current maturity on the ground, the state of play, the operational, where the operations actually are. So let's pull up that slide. One of the things we're seeing consistently is that our GBS heads, as they take this assessment, are all very consistently seeing greater operational maturity in the as-is state. That could be for a range of reasons. Number one, they have more familiarity with the model. Number two, maybe our GBS leaders, and we can certainly explore this with Rob and Phil, are more optimistic type of folks. Maybe they're taking a longer view. I think that depends GBS to GBS. But looking at this chart with orange on the outside, broadly, our leader here sees, shall we say, a greater maturity in the way operations are currently run. Arushi, do you want to make another comment? What else do you see here?
No, you're absolutely right there, Deborah. I think what we have been seeing and what we can also see in this particular chart is that the GBS head tends to have a greater, sense of the operational maturity of their operations than their minus ones. And that is to do with their, familiarity with the GBS evolution or a greater confidence in the delivery excellence as opposed to some of their team members as well. Overall, this chart depicts that there is a room for the entire GBS leadership team to grow, especially across certain mindsets like inclusivity as well as innovation. And I mean, clearly it tells us that there is still room for them to better themselves or focus or prioritize other mindsets.
Okay. All right, let's dive a little bit deeper. If we could have the next slide.
I think this is where the things get more interesting.
Yeah, this is where it gets interesting. One of the things the assessment allows us to do is to do a deep dive on the team. We can start to understand what each team member thinks, and that may vary by role, by maturity in GBS, by maturity in the organization, by maturity in a certain job, because we know GBS leadership change roles pretty consistently. So let's pull this apart and look at a team in this use case. We can have the next slide. One of the things we want our participants to understand is there's no right or wrong answer in when we evaluate mindsets. Basically, what we look at is, do team members place more importance, which is blue, more importance than the leader, or less importance than the leader? We use the leader as the ground zero. And the leader in our organizations, our GBS organizations, set the tone, set the strategy, they lead. So what we're able to do in this analysis is to say, where do each one of their directs, and this is a very large team, where do each one of their directs sit relative to the leader's beliefs and attitude? Do they think that the mindset is more important to drive performance, or do they see it as less important? So, Arushi, what does this chart actually tell to our participants?
Right. Very clearly, as we could see that all about the customer, which is the first ranked mindset by the GBS head, there are some sort of a dissonance there with his or her team members. We are seeing a lot of oranges, which means that the certain GBS leadership team members are placing lesser importance to what the GBS head is placing. And this is one of the primary anchors or primary personal anchors for the GBS leader here. Conversely, what we are seeing as a positive viewpoint here is that data-driven. For that particular mindset, the team is fairly aligned with the GBS head. So their beliefs and attitudes are somewhat, all are aligned. But then what we also see by way of this particular assessment view is, for example, you have certain GPOs in your team, like a P2P or an S2P. And what we have seen is that in certain cases, they are not end-to-end thinker as how much your GBS head is. So those are some of the interesting cases that we have actually seen while we have done some of these assessments, or possibly your head of customer excellence actually not being enough all about the customer. So these are some of the things that actually help the team or your GBS head actually understand what is going wrong, and just help
it's
them
not wrong,
understand.
Arushi. It's not a wrong, Arushi. Where there's a gap,
Right.
I think what is probably most illustrative here is that the leader is passionate about all about the customer in his ranked mindsets, in their assessed mindsets, but the team just doesn't see it as important. But conversely, the team sees being commercial as more important. So again, there's no right or wrong answer. It's what people actually believe. So let's look at the next slide and let's look at our level sets. It's important to understand, in order to make a change, it's important to understand what the team as in total thinks about the relative maturity of an operation. So we can start to say, you think this is important, but it's not, the maturity isn't there. What do we need to do about it? This is all about becoming actual. So looking at this again with the leader as ground zero, you can see a lot of orange and some blue. Again, with orange reminding our participants, orange being less maturity perceived, and blue being higher maturity. So Arushi, with the orange being less maturity perceived, let's start out with all about the customer in terms of
Right.
what operations look like today on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. So with respect to all about the customer, what we could see here is that some of the team's functional leaders, as well as the head of digital ops or the HR business partner or the change management manager, we are seeing that they are not as all about the customer as the GBS head
They don't believe
with
the
respect to their
maturity
current
is about, they don't believe
their, the current
they perceive
operations
a lower
maturity.
maturity.
Right. But the good news is that they are fairly aligned with respect to passion for growth. So their current understanding of the maturity of their operations with respect to passion for growth is where exactly where the GBS head is also perceiving it to be. So overall, there would be certain, there would be certain alignments, there would be certain areas, opportunity areas for the leadership team as a whole to align better. For example, data driven comes across as one of the mindsets wherein the team, for example, your service line director or the regional center lead or the head of digital ops, in fact, they are pursuing a higher maturity than the GBS head. Yeah.
So it gives us a basis for an action plan. If we can then look at the next, please. Next slide. Let's talk about, you've just seen a case study. Let's turn our attention to Rob and Phil, both of whom have taken along with their teams a mindsets assessment. Let's talk about what this does for them, how it actually works. Is it powerful? Is it aligned with other initiatives in their organizations? If we can go to the next slide and open this up for some dialogue. So both Rob and Phil, you and your team both took the assessment. What did you get out of it?
Well, I can jump in first here. So for me, first of all, I think it was a big eye opener. It was something that kind of woke me up. So I thought my team and I were pretty much marching to the same North Star, same direction, everything else. And what it revealed is, in generally, we were pretty well aligned on what we were supposed to be doing and how we're going to match up to the expectations of the organization. But it did highlight a couple of key areas where we were thinking very differently about the services, and that was causing strain under the surface, and couldn't really pinpoint until we saw these results where some of that stress was coming from. So yeah, I would say, before I turn it over to Phil here, there's probably three things that we have been using this assessment for. So one is what I was just describing. It was the alignment on expectations with stakeholders and making sure that we were kind of marching the same way, and kind of doing it the same way. Number two, based on the data that you guys just saw about how people place more or less emphasis in the leader in certain areas, again, that was a real wake up for me, just making sure that I was lining the right people up to the right roles. If you have a mindset that's very data driven and very operationally focused, and I put you in a sales position, maybe that's not a good alignment for that role. So you want to align to what people kind of do best and how they think best. And then finally, something new we're experimenting with is with open roles for key leadership positions. We want to use this assessment to look at candidates coming in and making sure that we're finding people who are aligned to the what these roles are going to be anticipated to do. So yeah, those are a couple of things that came to the top of my mind. I'll turn it over to Phil and see what else we got.
Thanks, Rob. Well, I actually, there's a lot of what you just said completely resonated with me. So I won't repeat any of it. I'll try and pick out a couple of different ones that happened with my team. We have a corporate leadership expectations that talks about perform and transform, and we're a large, industrial corporation, defense contractor. We're full of engineers, and just doing some brilliant things, but the GBS team really struggled to align to the descriptors of perform and transform in our organization. And what the mindsets activity did for us was enable us to talk about what mindsets are important for us to perform and what mindsets are important for us to transform. And just like Rob, we had some differences and a whole pile of other things. And I almost could carbon copy what you just said. I won't repeat it at all, Rob. But that really helped us talk about those two things from a GBS frame of reference. How do we perform and how do we transform? So it really changed the conversation completely in the team. And I guess I'll leave it there, Deborah, because that I really did align with what Rob said too.
What did the two of you, what surprised you most about your assessments, yourselves and your teams? I mean, you both went into this intrigued, but after you saw the sausage making, what was most surprising to you?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll start this one, Rob, and then you can follow. I mean, the fact that we did a ranking, and then you assessed us on what our mindset really is, and really, I took that as an ambition type mindset. So, what do I think I should be? What do I really underneath think the ambition should be? And what's the reality of where I think we are today? And I was quite a bit different to the demos that you just gave, in that my rank mindsets were quite a bit different in some cases, not all, but in some cases, to the assessed mindset. And then when we did my level set, well, level set was significantly lower than the teams. So my little orange bit was right around the center compared to theirs being further out. So they thought they were in a better place than I thought we were, which was really. And then there were some significant differences.
You're different from a lot of leaders, Phil.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'm a perfectionist. I don't know, something like that. But I have high expectations, and I think the other thing is coming to a team where I was hired to reboot the strategy because it wasn't delivering in the way that the new leadership wanted to. Then maybe you come with a different mindset there, that there's a reason you're here. They don't like what they've got, so you've got to think about it in a different way, and that maybe was something that that came with that as well.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. It's funny. This is one of the areas where Phil and I think were quite opposite. So one of the things that surprised me was also on the level sets versus the mindsets. And unlike Phil, I was the one who was the optimist here and thought that things were generally better than my team. And we were trying to unpack that. I didn't understand that at first because I tend to be a tough grader as well. But what I found is, before we kind of did a reboot on the strategy here, the team really felt beat down by the organization. You know, everything was the daily grind. Everything was escalations around, something ineffective in their services. A lot of the people have been here for life. They haven't seen any other companies. They haven't seen any other GBS organizations. And so they tended to look at what we had and didn't think it was very good. Whereas I'm coming in, having done this for 36 years now, seeing all kinds of organizations around the world. And I looked at what we were doing and said, you know what? There's a lot of things we can fix here, but this isn't that bad. We're doing okay, compared to other places I've seen. And so I tended to be a bit more optimistic. I would say the other big surprise that I had was on the personal alignments of my team. So I can go into maybe a couple of examples later on in the Q&A, but we had some people pop up. If you looked at the dummy data that we had there before, one of them stood out to me, and it was very similar to the situation I had, where you have a director of operations, someone who's really driving the work delivery and the measurement and the reporting of that delivery. You would expect that person to be extremely data driven, to place more emphasis on data and things like that, more emphasis on customer satisfaction, being all about the customer than the leader does, because that's their role. And we found people who were exactly the opposite of that, not very data driven, not very customer centric in those roles. And so, that's always a good point to stop and say, why is this? It doesn't mean you have to swap the person out. It just means you have to have a transparent conversation about why their priorities may be different than what you think they should be. Learn something about that situation and either, change the behavior or change the job. So those were a couple of really neat things that popped out that have helped me quite a bit since taking this.
Bill, surprise, any more surprises that you've seen?
No, I think I covered it. That in that, the thing about what you'd like to be versus what you really are, and that was a real wake-up call. I think that was a difference. Yeah, maybe the next question is one that sort of brings that out a little bit more. Actually, Deb.
Have at it.
Right. So, I was. I came and the remit I've got was to create a brand new strategy, but effectively it was about increasing the capabilities and the size of the GBS. And I was talking about things about customer experience. I used three E's: efficiency, effectiveness, and experience. And I was talking about efficiency being table stakes in a GBS world, effectiveness being giving time back to the people that use your services, making them right first time, not having failure demand, et cetera, et cetera. And I was talking a lot about implementing an NPS score. They didn't have an NPS score, and measuring customer experience. And I was talking about the things that I wanted to see happen to enable the service to deliver, so the GBS to deliver what the CEO and the CFO. When my assessment came out, most of my team went all about the customer as probably their highest rank. And all about the customer was pretty low in my ranking. My highest ranking was passion for growth, because essentially what I'd done was come look at the Rolls-Royce strategy, one Rolls-Royce. How do we get to one Rolls-Royce in the services that we provide across it, and how do we provide at scale capabilities that can enable this great company to carry on innovating and making new engines and really really driving its value chain on. And what I'd said was to my team was, I didn't say we have a passion for growth. I said we needed to do this. I needed to do this. I need to do this. And they interpreted it as all about the customer and sort of more commercially savvy. So when their scoring came out, those two mindsets came out higher, and yet mine was all about the growth right at the top of the house. And it was really interesting to have that debate with my team about why I put all about growth at the top. Scale matters. If you're not growing, you're dying. All of those things, right, really matter. And the difference between that as an ambition and as a mindset, and me describing what I think it took operationally to enable us to get there, to my team. I wasn't saying my mindset. I was saying what I think I wanted them to do operationally. And that that misalignment really was a great conversation with my team to really align us on what the mindset should be. And we did align on all about passion for growth, Deborah, if you
You
remember.
did. You
Deborah
did.
asked my whole team the question, are you just doing what the boss wants, or do you really believe this now?
Yeah.
And the whole room went, I really believe it.
Yeah, I mean, there is that element here, but one of the things I think both of you have done well is to listen to your teams, and this is about adjudicating what's important to the team. You leaders alone can't move the dial.
Yeah, I think you made a good comment earlier, Deborah, about the noise in the system driving people's assessments. And I think that was the thing that resonated most with me, just kind of on daily operations. I agree with Phil, if you're not growing, you're dying. Within my organization, we've taken it kind of one step further and said, what encourages people to grow with us versus reject that opportunity for growth? And we've done a lot of assessment of our stakeholders along those lines, and I have personally over the years. And a couple of things that pop out is, number one, the quality of your operations. So if I give you something, do you do it well? And another thing is the customer experience. So if I give you something, do you make this process smoother, cleaner, easier than we had it before? What surprised me was, a lot of my folks were jumping immediately to digital first and innovation as their kind of top assessments. And I understand that because that's all you hear these days. It's AI this, AI that, Gen AI, agents. If you're not doing something with these, you're falling behind. And so, yeah, my whole team was excited to go out and learn this stuff. And I started looking at some of the first few things that they had developed. And I kind of noticed what the gap was. They were going in and trying to develop applications or implement technologies with the primary purpose in mind to save money. And, for me, it's more about, are we harmonizing this process? Are we making it easier? Are we, creating higher levels of quality? And so one of the kind of tension points there was they were running right into innovation where I was saying, whoa, slow down. Let's make sure we're focused on what the customer really wants, and let's align on end-to-end processes first, because that's going to allow us to make better decisions about where to apply innovation, where to create a better customer experience. So that was a disconnect that we had to resolve. And now I think we're at a happy medium. I appreciate a little bit more about what we can do with a digital first strategy. They certainly appreciate a lot more that we have to be a little bit more pragmatic and directed in how we pick those opportunities to make sure that there's things that actually resonate with the customers more than just money.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that GBS organizations have is that all of those mindsets are important, but we've got to focus. We've got to prioritize what is most likely to drive performance at the stage of maturity we're at. And so it's not to say that, if commercially savvy is at the bottom of the heap, it's not important, but we all know we put resources and make programmatic decisions based on what we think is most important. So I think what I've seen in both your assessments and others that we've performed is that it starts to sharpen the mind about where we place our attention. Is there anything you saw, both of you saw, or that you did not see, or you believe that you did not see in the assessment? Something that surprised you that was missing?
Yeah, I can jump in. There were several of those. And those were happy discoveries. If I thought there was going to be a misalignment and it turns out that I'm not misaligned with my team, that's always a good thing. But sometimes there's interesting stories underneath those alignments. And so I thought on the commercial aspect that we were going to be quite misaligned. So historically, when we talk about allocating out GBS cost and things, I've really tried to push the limits to get to a model where we allocate based on customer complexity. And I like to get to that model, even though it's difficult. I like to get there because that drives true behaviors from your customer side, true kind of partnering behaviors from your customers. If they know something's complex and they're getting billed more for it, they have stake in the game to make it better. We don't have an allocation system anywhere near that sophisticated here. We're still kind of way back at maturity step 1, where we allocate based on revenue or head count out to our business units. So I was expecting to see a big misalignment there. It turns out my team was very, very interested in maturing our commercial operations and our allocations just as much as I was, but for different reasons. So their motivation was, this allocation method is so bad that when my customers ask me how much does it cost for this or that or whatever, I can't give them a clear answer because the data is just not there. And so they wanted to mature it for those reasons. I was trying to mature it strictly from the behavioral aspect and driving those partnering behaviors with the functions. But in the end, we both wanted the same thing. We both were putting the same kind of emphasis or importance on it, just for slightly different under the surface reasoning for that. Phil, what about you?
Yeah, I can probably maybe I'll give you a completely different one.
Viva la différence.
As my leadership team, I've got some of the team that are really easy to lead, and some that require a different level of attention. There's two of the leaders who were most aligned to me in my score when we did the really detailed, the really detailed chart that Rishi put up, which is matching the leaders to the. Very interestingly, that one who's really high performer, delivers fantastic results, but it's really quite tough to lead as a leader. I looked at it and went, wow, I didn't expect that. They're really aligned to the way that I think, the way that my mindsets are, and the way that their level sets were. And we explored it. Obviously, there's personal cover. We explored it together, and they're quite a challenging person, and some of them have team feedback that I can be quite challenging at times to try and make things happen, but really supportive person, and I get that feedback as well, which was quite interesting. But it was really a bit of a surprise from being a leader that was working with a member of the team that takes a little bit more of my time to find they were one of the most aligned. Maybe that's a consequence rather than something that it was right. And then another one of my leaders who works a lot more in the digital space didn't have digital first really sky high, which I had it in the middle somewhere. It wasn't high up, and we all debated about it, and then the two of us sat afterwards and talked through quite a lot of the challenges we have to make things like Gen AI, agentic actually work. And then the reality check that we both have, that if you don't get your base data in a good order, those things don't work. You get garbage in, garbage out on Gen AI. It produces new knowledge from old knowledge. If you've got garbage, you're going to get more garbage. And also, if you want an agentic solution to work, it's a bit like going back in time when we first put bots on. They kept failing because our data was lousy. If you then want an orchestrating bot to do it, which is, I'm underplaying agentic, of course, but if you want that to all work, you really, really have to get stuff working well. If you want, AI search to work, you've got to make sure your data is really in good order, because the AI search will bring you garbage. And so it was interesting how we were both similar in that we've got more to do to get digital first to work, and we were very, very aligned across all the mindsets. And he's really easy to manage, very, very easy to manage. So it's really quite interesting.
What was the team's response? I mean, both of you, Phil, you you had a very transparent workshop. Everyone's around the table, and Rob, you looked, you use this probably more selectively in conversations with your team. What did your team think about this? Did they feel that somebody got in their head and were upset about it? Did they see the power of aligning a mindset around performance? What did what was the response?
Deborah, you know me well. I'm quite an inclusive leader, right? We maybe too inclusive. That was something that came out in the workshop. But I thought it was quite interesting how we'd gone through talking about the diagrams that you've all seen on the webinar today, and we had individual members at very different places in some cases. A couple that were aligned, as I said, but individual members. And we went away and we broke out into 2 breakout groups to try and pick our top 4 or 5. And I was in one breakout and I was quite quiet. I was letting the others lead the breakout. And the second breakout worked away. We were going for quite a while, an hour and a half, couple of hours, something like that. And then we came back in the room and we played back. And we were almost absolutely aligned. There was a couple of nuances of how we'd interpreted the mindsets, but we were pretty much aligned on our top 4 or 5 mindsets when we walked back in the room. And that was like, wow, there's something happened here, right? All of a sudden, going out and having a discussion in 2 separate breakout groups, and then both breakout groups came back with roughly the same set of mindsets. There's something special happened today. And then we explored it a little more, and we talked about how they'd interpreted things, and it really made a difference. Now they're talking about it all the time. So we got it in before I went in. I had to go into the CEO today, and the bit of nudge I got was, go on, let your passion for growth show and make sure you're service obsessed when you're talking about it. And it was the 2 things I got before
I'll
I
have to
went
put
in.
it on the t-shirts now.
Yeah. So it was quite interesting how they've got that in there, starting to be part of the DNA. It's not there yet, but it's starting to be there.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say, first of all, my team, we did it in a slightly different format, as you put it, Deborah. We did it more through kind of personal taking of the surveys. And then I reviewed the responses, and then I sat down and had a review with the whole team. But what I would say is, first of all, I guess I'm very happy. I've got a very curious team. They love data. They love new assessments and things like that. So there was generally a lot of excitement. They wanted to see the results. I think it's good that we've changed the colors. You guys noticed on some of those previous slides that we did orange and blue as kind of distance from the leader. The original color set was red and green that we were using, and so people immediately looked up their name or their position on there and saw a bunch of red and thought that they were in trouble.
Yeah.
And so we had to explain to people, no, this is just you place more emphasis or less emphasis on this than I do. So once we got past that, again, it just relieved the tension. We had a lot of good conversations about the whys there. But I would say my team also, I'm quite proud of them. We have a really nice communications and change management team in GBS. Obviously, as we drive a lot of transitions and major projects around the world, we have a OCM capability attached to that. They're actually looking at this as a way to, apply a lot of change principles just to our own GBS organization. So now that we've kind of gotten past the first couple of phases of analyzing and using the data, I've turned it over to them, and they are now engineering a stakeholder management strategy, stakeholder alignment strategy around the responses that we saw from people in this survey. So they're even looking at potentially opening this up and doing it with a wider set of stakeholders, even outside of GBS. So I can say very easily, this has generated a lot of excitement, a lot of creativity in how we can use the data. And I'm excited to see what they come up with next.
I know we're getting up towards the top of the hour, Any questions? Do we have any questions coming out from the audience? Anything, Rushi? I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah, you might just want to remind people there's a Q&A button.
And there's a Q&A opportunity here.
Yeah. In the meantime, Deborah, I think we can go to the next slide.
What we wanted to do is give some opportunity to for any questions, but having seen none, I guess question, if we can go back one slide, if you don't mind, we can go back one slide. How are you using the mindsets to change the way you work? I think that's probably a key question for both of you.
Mm-hmm. You want to go first, Phil, or me?
Yeah, I'll go if you like. I talked about this perform and transform, and what we've done is aligned a mindset to perform and a mindset to transform. And the mindset to perform is the service obsessed mindset, and the mindset for transform is our passion for growth. So you have to drive a transformation program. If you want to grow, you've got to transfer roles, you've got to realign the way that the services operate. And if you want to perform, that's measured by how service obsessed you are. Is the quality right? Are you continuously improving? Are you saving time by making the service as perfect as it possibly can be? Are you getting it right first time? All those things really, really, really matter. And we've really aligned our perform and transform over those two. And then I guess in the interest of time, I'll be a bit short. And then the other thing is it goes into the way we work as well, which is, the data driven was one of our mindsets. We've looked at, are our KPIs right? How are we using our service management data to tell us answers to our questions? How are we blowing away myths with data? How are we validating things with our data? And have we got the right data set? So we're actually making key decisions about our service offering. So one of our services, for example, has a lower NPS score, but it's been coming up. What's been changing it? What have we been doing right that's improving it? And then the reverse of, the services that have got really high NPS scores, what are we doing differently in those services to sustain them? And how do we put that across to the other service offerings that we have? So very much using those three mindsets in the way we operate.
That's cool. I actually learned something today. I'm glad I joined. I like the perform versus transform mindset categories. I may borrow that from you.
Well, GBS is nothing if it's not a community that shares.
Yeah, exactly. For me, I would say, obviously this has changed the way we work, and we're continuing to apply it in new ways to find additional things that we can change. For me, it's been more probably individual than what Phil pointed out. I really like that overall approach, so I may borrow that. But what I've been doing is really asking the questions. When I see someone who is either has assessed their mindset as quite different than mine in an area, it leads me to interesting conversations about why is that? Why are you placing more or less emphasis on this? And what can I learn, still being fairly new to this organization, what can I learn about, the culture here or whatever that can help us, move in a different direction that might be adopted faster as we go along. And then also, like I said before, just aligning people to the right roles. If you've got someone who's got a lot of passion for customer satisfaction, a lot of passion for data, and you've got them in a role where they can't explore those kind of natural capabilities in their bag or their mindsets that they bring to the table, then it's a good opportunity to switch that around. So we're looking at doing some of those things right now, switching people to align better to the mindsets that they put forward. But yeah, that's a couple things.
Great. Well, it falls to me to thank you, Rob, and Phil for participating today, and always a pleasure to work with Arushi. If I could turn it back to the Everest webinar team to close us up, but thank you participants today. I think hopefully this was a new way of thinking about your new superpower, which is GBS Mindsets.